What if brain fog, mood changes, poor focus, or even chronic fatigue weren't had nothing to do with aging? What if you had something else that could address brain fog and all these different conditions? What if what's happening in your brain is inflammation? We understand that inflammation is the root cause of disease in the body, but what about cognitive decline? How many people are being misdiagnosed with dementia and Alzheimer's that may just have inflammation? As you know, you cannot measure, at least in the past that I know of, and perhaps maybe today in this discussion we'll learn more, because we have the brain whisperer in the classroom, back in the classroom, and Dr. John Silva, and we're going to talk about neuroinflammation and the brain, the effects on the brain. Let's say you have a diagnosis of dementia or Alzheimer's. Technically, the only way that you could verify that is when they look at your brain when you die. But what if it's misdiagnosis? And so today we're going to be talking to Dr. John Silva about some of the signs and symptoms and what we can do, most importantly, to stop the progression of this decline, this inflammation. And so get your pencils, get your paper out, because we're going to take lots of notes and learn and grow together. And when you need a friend, you can count on me. I'll be right here waiting for you. Hi, my name is Lillian McDermott, and I am a certified life coach, a certified holistic cancer coach, and the host of the Lillian McDermott radio show Classroom. If this is your first time in the classroom, please know I've been waiting for you. This is a safe place where you can go when you need a friend. It is my commitment to provide natural ways to heal, and it is my mission to make awareness, responsibility, and truth a part of our everyday life. And I hope you, my listening, as well as my viewing friend, will feel empowered to embrace a new truth and live the life of your dreams. Well, I can't believe we're in February. Can you believe we're in February? And we are always focused on love and the heart, but let's look at the brain. You know, it drives everything. Everything that you do in life, it drives the brain. You go through the brain. You look at filters through the brain, everything. So today is an important conversation that many of us don't even think about. But what if you have inflammation in that brain? And what does it look like? What does it feel like? And fortunately, we have Dr. John Silva. He is amazing. He is, when I tell you that I've learned so much about the brain with Dr. John Silva, I am not kidding you. And I'm so grateful that since it is our sole purpose in life to give and receive love and knowledge, I am grateful that Dr. John Silva is here to do just that. Welcome, Dr. Silva. I am so looking forward to this conversation because there's so many people and I understand that 70% of people that are diagnosed with dementia are misdiagnosed. So that means only 30. So 30% of the people have it and 70 don't. So let's talk about why this topic is so important today.
Yeah. And while we're on the topic of dementia, I'm glad you brought that up. It's just one of several different diagnoses, so to speak, or how your brain stops operating properly when you have had probably sometimes we estimate decades of your brain in this dysregulated, dysfunctional state. You may not be seeing the symptoms during those early years, but they're there, the problem's there nonetheless, and it just manifests and continues to get worse. And then what do most people do? We chalk it up to aging. We're forgetting things more often, but everyone else around us is doing the same thing. Well, the reality is you keep letting that go, it's going to become a bigger problem to the point where it could be either misdiagnosed or maybe it is diagnosed properly. And then even within that realm, who's really getting to the root causes as
Correct.
to why you now are at this point of dementia? Whatever type of dementia they diagnose you with, that's just the name. What's going on with your physiology, your anatomy, the structure of your brain? We got to dive really deep. You know, anything I've ever done to help people is always diving deep into the body down to the cellular level. If we can just help people understand that, and that applies for any chronic condition, any acute condition, we live our lives through our cells, our cell physiology, because we are nothing but the conglomerate of trillions of cells that all intercommunicate, that all work together harmoniously. Yes, they're separated and broken down by different systems, different tissues, different organs, but ultimately, we got to look at things from the perspective of the cell. And unfortunately, conventional medicine, not knocking it, but it doesn't really do that. We just try to suppress symptoms. And especially for dementia, there's really not much out there that I've seen that works for dementia.
How do we determine? So let's go dive deep in.
Yeah,
So
sure.
for those of you who have never met Dr. John Silva, I have a playlist for him on YouTube. And he's been a wonderful teacher. We'll share a little bit about your background, Dr. Silva, so that people understand how many years you have looking at the brain as well as the spine.
Yeah, 24 years overall in practice. And half of that time, 12 years now, here we are, 2026, has been focused predominantly on the brain and what I call brain-based disorders. And I consider myself a functional medicine practitioner with more of an emphasis or a lean toward what we call functional neurology. And how either one of those two, whether it's functional neurology, functional medicine, differ than conventional medicine or conventional neurology, is we are looking at a human being, a person, our client, our patient, from a whole body perspective. We're diving deep into how all of our systems are interconnected. And as you mentioned when you open up today's show, our brain being the forefront of everything in our life, because the brain masterfully controls every physiological function. It has communication with every part of our body. So, when it really comes down to it, the reality is you could have a heart condition, you could have a problem in your extremities, a vascular condition. We should always be looking at the brain and the central nervous system as part of the solution to recover from that problem. But that's again where conventional medicine kind of fails us, and it has for a long time because it's become so fragmented, so specialized. You've got to run to this practitioner for that organ or that system, this practitioner for this condition. No one's looking really at you as a whole individual with all of your components all working harmoniously as they should, which ones are broken down. So that's the whole premise behind functional medicine. And again, with functional neurology, we really put an emphasis on the neurological system, especially the brain. Brain is a supercomputer. I consider it command central. And it's become a fascinating field. It really has. I mean, we've had so many advancements in the last couple of decades in neuroscience, computer technology, which runs so many of the different interventions and therapies. Mm-hmm. And now with AI, it's going to be incredible what's going to happen over the next, call it 5 years. It's on an exponential growth curve. So, I mean, yes, and when we talk AI, there can be that dark side of it.
Yes.
But the reality is I'm first, and this is just, again, coming back to where we put our intent, where we put our focus. Okay, so I'm focusing, yes, I hear about the negative consequences of AI, but if we have more people worldwide that are putting more focus on the benefits of what AI can offer us for humanity, for our own personal well-being, for helping us with our daily activities, our careers, you name it. I mean, it has so many applications. I think it's a wonderful thing. I think it'd be a wonderful thing for humanity, as long as it's kept in check and it's kept in control.
And that's the problem. And that's a problem. It's not being kept in control. I don't mind. And I know this is not the topic that we're going to discuss. However, this is what's important about AI is that you double check and triple check what you're being told. And I am just concerned that this next generation, because you go on Facebook and all you see is these fake images.
Oh, yeah.
Fake images. That is what I have a problem with. They could take my image and do an entire show by programming my voice, by programming anything. They can make it look like I did anything wrong, and there's no watermark saying this is AI. I believe there should be watermark on anything that's AI. Nothing should be allowed to be exposed as, a video.
No, I agree.
That is where I have a problem with.
AI to be able to sift through lots of data points as it relates to neuroscience and
No,
and
and I
developments
get it.
in, in healthcare.
That part
So
I
yeah,
get.
I mean, but ultimately, the most intelligent AI is right here,
That
just
is
between our own
it.
ears.
That is it. Do you remember having to do mental math? Do you remember having to learn your, as um, Jethro Bodine would say, the gazintas? I had to learn your timetables. You had to learn you had
Yeah,
to learn that. And as soon as the calculator came out, man, let's add it up in the calculator. My concern is that we'll stop thinking on our own and that we're going to be as smart as Google, as our weakest link. We're as smart as our weakest
yeah.
link. So, but that is important. So anything that you learn today, I want you to verify that, check it out, because it is so important that we become our own MD, our own medical detective, and the information that you're going to hear today, verify it so that it becomes
Mhm.
your truth, your new truth. And so today, we're talking about this neuroinflammation. So when you chose this topic, I was thinking, okay, there's inflammation in the body. How
Mhm.
is that generated? Because you could see inflammation in the body for the most part. You'll see a big gut. You might see obesity, but there are people that are inflamed in their body and they don't see it.
Yeah,
How is it
yeah.
different than neuroinflammation?
Sure, sure. So let's I guess take it up to the top. So when we speak of inflammation, most people, what comes up in people's mind is like an injury. Okay. So for instance, you hit your elbow, you have an acute injury, you see your elbow swell up, it's red, painful, tender. That's an acute type of inflammation. And by the way, when we speak of inflammation, I have people understand is it's not always a negative thing. It's just a natural response from our body, particularly our immune system, going into work to repair the damage from hitting your elbow. But it's about keeping this inflammation in check, and that's where things can start to lead to bigger problems. So that is an acute type of inflammation. So I wanted to distinguish that from what I call, or what we call in the realm of functional medicine or even conventional medicine, is finally caught on to this, which we've known for almost 3 decades now, called systemic inflammation. So again, always look at things from the perspective of our cells. So systemic inflammation resides at the cellular level. It's this low-grade inflammation. It's not an acute inflammation you may get from an injury, although it can, acute injury, when not addressed, can manifest in a chronic systemic inflammation. But nonetheless, it's this low-grade inflammation at the level of the cells in our body. And then it can affect every part of our body. And it starts to degrade a number of physiological processes in the cells. Okay, so let's just take it, for instance, we look at our cells. So if you can imagine going back to your high school biology textbooks, the typical picture of a cell was like this circular thing with a cell wall, or what we call the cell membrane. And then as you dive deeper into the cell, you have this cytoplasm, which is like the liquid or the fluid inside. Then you have these different parts of the cell that we've given names, and they all have their role or their function. So you have, for instance, the mitochondria. These are the parts of the cell that make the energy that drives what that cell's function is. So let's just back it back out to the cell membrane. Cell membrane has so many different functions that it has to carry out moment to moment throughout entire life. And one of those functions is the ability to allow toxins and bacteria, viruses that don't belong in the cell out, and then also allow nutrients and certain things into the cell. And it's this electrochemical gradient, as we call it. But when you have an inflamed cell membrane, which really isn't measured, there's really no way to see it on any diagnostics that I'm aware of. Again, there are blood tests that can give us a relative idea of how much systemic inflammation you may have in your body and to what degree. But we're talking what's happening at the cellular level. And this is just, again, one of many things that are affected, but that cell membrane becomes inflamed. And now you don't have the right transport in and out of the cell of things like toxins, nutrients. So right there, you're already setting yourself up for all kinds of problems. Again, so let's take those cells into our cardiovascular system, our heart cells. Let's take it down into our stomach or our gastrointestinal system. Now we got inflammatory condition of our GI cells. And when we're speaking of the brain, we call this neuroinflammation. So I always like to come back to the basics. Look at the word, break it down. Neuro meaning nervous system, nerves, and then inflammation. So we're talking about the systemic inflammation at the level of the nerves throughout the entire body. But again, we'll keep our focus and emphasis on the brain cells or neurons, as we call them.
Very good.
So
Very
hopefully,
good.
and again, we can get that dive deeper into the cell. In fact, I did mention mitochondria. So an
Yeah.
important thing to realize here, and it's interesting because mitochondria is getting more and more discussed. It's becoming more top of mind awareness, even for the general population.
Yeah.
And it should be, as we've known for, again, in the realm of functional medicine anyway. I mean, we've known this for a long time. These mitochondria produce the energy for our cells to function. Guess what? You start inflaming those things, they can't put out the right energy to meet
Yeah.
up with just the daily demands, never mind try to kick in and activate the self-healing mechanisms that all of our bodies have pre-programmed for eons throughout
True.
human being evolution. So
True.
it's just interesting. So we're just talking about the cell membrane and mitochondria. We can go deeper and deeper. It affects our genetics, but
We're gonna geek out. Are we gonna
ultimately
geek out on us?
so this is an important part, and people may have heard, if you've heard the concept of systemic inflammation, we've known that this is one of the ultimate root causes of virtually every chronic disease known to humankind, from A to Z. No matter what label of diagnosis you're given, there is going to be some degree of systemic inflammation at play. So it needs
So,
to be addressed. Yeah.
so what are some of the symptoms? Because we talked about brain fog, we talked about all those things. Are those different? What's the telltale sign? What's the telltale sign that it is?
Good question. So again, we'll keep it focused in the brain. So if you're having any type of cognitive, especially cognitive, and what we mean by cognitive functions, things like memory, forgetfulness when you don't have sufficient or good memory. We're talking the ability to stay attentive to whatever your task is that you're doing at that current time, your ability to process auditor or process conversations, to be able to process what you're looking at. All these are all what we call cognitive functions. Executive processing is another thing. So we can start to see this inflammation that affects the brain neurons, nerve cells, and we start to see a cognitive decline. And it can start as young as kids. I mean, I see kids when we run laboratory tests with systemic inflammation at 5 years old. Okay, and we'll get into some of the causes here and some of the easy things that people can take away from this conversation today and start to work on in their life to reduce that systemic inflammation, maybe even start to address it head on. But it's prevalent, and no matter what the age. And of course, the longer you have it, the more damage we're doing to our cells, and it gets harder to recuperate. It's still recuperable, but it gets harder. So cognitive, it affects your cognition. And then next, it affects your emotional well-being. Because you remember our brain, and we've had this topic before, I like to look at our brain as having four primary functions. Cognitive function, as we just discussed. Our brain is our emotional well-being. So from our brain comes from our emotions, whether we're in a state of depressive traits, we're anxious, we're overly stressed. All these things are emotions that are manufactured in our brain by the way our brains are functioning. Now, of course, all of this is all about balance. So when our brain function is out of balance, we can have depression tendencies or traits, we can have anxiety. And for most people that I work with, they usually express traits of both. One's a little bit more significant than the other. So it affects our emotional well-being. And lastly, it affects our behavioral well-being. Again, behaviors come from the neurons in our brains all working in to get together to make these complex neurological circuits that drive our behaviors. And again, it's all about being on this even scale. Okay, you have behavioral dysregulation. Now you got people who are very impulsive, they're disruptive, and it can swing in different directions. And then lastly, I always like to consider the brain from the perspective, as we mentioned earlier, your brain masterfully controls and coordinates every other cell in your body, every other system, every other organ, every other function. So it is the supercomputer driving your whole life from the time you're born until the time you eventually pass. So important part of our body that we all should be considering long before we start having symptoms of what I call brain-based disorders. So to answer your question, really anything. I mean, depression, anxiety, and cognitive problems, forgetfulness. If you've been diagnosed with dementia, or maybe you're starting to notice a slip of the memory becoming more prevalent, these can all be a sign of some degree of neuroinflammation of the neurons or nerve cells in your brain.
And are there things that we do to dysregulate it, like the way we eat, the way we stress? What are some, causes that we can, you know, be able to mitigate, that we can say,
Yeah.
okay, I am doing this, and maybe this is something that is causing this inflammation versus, I'm just getting older, or versus, I'm just forgetful or unfocused. So what are some
Yeah.
of the things that we do to exacerbate the problem?
Probably one of the biggest things is dietary habits or poor dietary habits. So how can I this gets fascinating because now we start to look at the intricacy of all of our systems together and how they work. So you eat a poor diet. You got these foods that you're ingesting that maybe have overly processed chemicals in them or even toxic ingredients, even just sugar itself, even though it's natural, so to speak. Again, they're overly manufactured. They strip out the nutrients we really need, or we're eating too much of them. They have an inflammatory, we can have an inflammatory response. So let's say we eat these foods, it has these toxins. Our GI system does its best to try to process that into energy to drive our systems. But at the first line of defense, so to speak, there's this delicate membrane within our gastrointestinal system in the small intestine. And we can start to have these toxins kind of eat away at this membrane. And what happens is we have these toxins start to go into the bloodstream that normally would have not have gone into the bloodstream. They would have been passed out with our next bowel movement. And here's where now the immune system, so now we're looking at, again, GI system and the immune system. So the immune system instantly recognizes through what are called immune mediators, these foreign substances, these toxins, these food additives, these food colorings, and it gets busy doing what it knows how to do. And, as I mentioned with the elbow, what's one of the first things you do when you whack your elbow? It starts to swell up, it gets red. This is your immune system going to work. It's doing it. It's sending in nutrients. It's sending in healing chemicals. That's its natural process. Now, if it goes too long, it becomes a bigger issue. But same thing here with our gastrointestinal system. So we have this thing, and people may have referred to this or heard of this, called leaky gut syndrome. Okay. And that's in fact, coming back to root causes, that's probably one of the other root causes as we speak of this systemic inflammation for so many conditions, especially autoimmune conditions. If you really want to work what I call upstream on taking care of an autoimmune condition, think in terms of your gastrointestinal system and your immune system and that delicate balance between those two. So we have these toxins out there free floating in the circulatory system. Immune system is responding, doing its job, but you keep bombarding it every day, week after week, year after year, decade after decade, eating poor quality foods and toxins. And the next thing you know, you've got this inflammation that just never goes away. And again, look back at the cells. What's it doing to your cells? It's wreaking havoc on the cell membrane, the mitochondria. So hopefully people can see those connections, but it's just what I just mentioned. So now we're talking the gastrointestinal system, the immune system at play, and then of course this blood's going everywhere. In fact, there's what's called the blood-brain barrier, which is very similar in design to our this delicate membrane that separates our GI system from our blood. We have the same thing going on in our brain. In fact, there's a new coin word for this called leaky brain syndrome. So we're finding out that this interface between your circulatory system, your blood flow in your brain, and the neurons, the nerve cells in your brain, are being compromised because of the systemic inflammation. And so now we've got not only a GI system, and it may be absent of symptoms for years, because this is all going on at just this low level. But the next thing you know, maybe you're getting achy joints because it's affecting your joints. You're having some brain fog. You're having sleep issues. You're having fatigue. And next thing you know, you've got multiple systems that are all breaking down from the systemic inflammation. So if we can get to root causes, and again, I always like to start with the nervous system first because it masterfully controls and coordinates all this. What if we can start telling the brain, hey, start reorganizing yourself, get more efficient, so we can send proper nerve signals down to your immune system, down to your GI system, and then keep looking further, perhaps laboratory tests to see if maybe you have toxins, maybe you do have some inflammation or systemic inflammation. So My approach, as with any functional medicine practitioner, is a whole body approach. Again, my emphasis is on this brain because it is an important part of the healing process.
No, I love it. I love it. And you know what? It's funny that you say leaky brain symptoms. You know, we always call it something. And one of the things I said at the beginning, which I'm hoping I'm not holding on to old data, but I had a neurosurgeon, neurologist, and I've had other doctors that have said, and I think it was Perlmutter that said it. I don't quote me on it, but it was
Yeah.
someone like Perlmutter. He said that 30% of people diagnosed with dementia don't have it. I mean, have it. 30%. That means
Mhm.
70% don't have it. And so when we look at neurofeedback, can neurofeedback reverse the inflammation, or do we still have to change our lifestyle along with neurofeedback? Because we always want the quick fix. You know, we want the quick
Yeah.
fix. So what is truth when it comes to the brain? What is
Mhm.
truth when it comes to and brain entrainment or neurofeedback and reversing the mitochondrial damage or whatever it is? What would you say about that?
Yeah. So let's see if I try to make this connection. So let's just again bring it back to systemic inflammation affecting the neurons in our cell. We have billions of them that make these all come together and make these intricate connections. So we have these complex neural circuits. So think of again, your brain is a supercomputer. And we have all these connections that are responsible for, again, our emotions, our behavioral well-being, and our cognitive well-being. But when you have, say, months or years of this systemic inflammation affecting the way these neurons function, not putting enough energy out because the mitochondria damaged, cell membrane is enabled to pass toxins out so that these cells become toxic and more inflamed. Now we have a breakdown of how the neurons, the nerve cells, are actually functioning, and they start functioning poorly. And the next thing you know, we start to see a shift in how our brains, what we call electricity, is transmitted from one neuron to the next. And you expand that over billions of circuits. Next thing you know, we have a breakdown in these circuits. So think of your neurons or your nerve cells as, again, wires that all interconnect that make these complex circuits that provide us our thoughts, our emotions, our behaviors. But systemic inflammation at the cellular level is breaking all these communication patterns down, and you let that manifest long enough, the next thing you know, you're having forgetfulness more often. You're starting to have memory issues, and usually it's short-term memory issues that the short-term memory goes first. Maybe you're starting to have some emotional changes, and you may not recognize some of this stuff yourself, but people who know you well are recognizing it. You may be getting more irritated, agitated at the simplest little things. You're not able to keep yourself organized. I mean, there's just so many ways this can manifest. Well, this was all just systemic inflammation, probably over a lifetime. And again, I just mentioned one cause, which was poor dietary habits. It can come from many other things too, which is what we address in functional medicine. So now we've got this dysregulation, or what we call this dysfunction of how our brains work electrically. And this is the fascinating thing about neurofeedback and how it plays a role in this, is because what neurofeedback does, it uses a technology which has been around since the 1930s called EEG, electroencephalogram. And it's a way to measure the electrical output of the billions of neurons in your brain. So we basically put a cap on somebody's head. It has sensors that correlate to each part of our brain, and we're able to look at the electricity running around these neural circuits, and we're able to see if the electricity is properly balanced, if there's areas where there's perhaps too much electricity, too little electricity, all coming back again from the cellular level due to that systemic inflammation and other causes too. And we've been doing this long enough where we can identify certain electrical patterns that can help us to say, not directly, but say, you know what, a big part of your problem and why you might be suffering depression, for instance, or panic attacks is because you got some neuroinflammation because of this particular electrical pattern in your brain. And I'll give you an example. So it's been well established in the realm of QEEG, so quantitative EEG is the specialized version that I use. And by the way, this is all non-invasive. And people who have ever had a head injury or a significant brain-based neurological problem, you probably have had an EEG before. Sometimes they're done at like a sleep study lab where they have a cap on your head for multiple hours. Sometimes it's just an office visit at a neurologist's office where they put a cap on your head. There's nothing invasive. These are just sensors that are detecting and measuring and recording your brain waves. So I do a form of that called QEEG, but a distinct pattern we see across all ages, but especially with children, we see more often is elevated delta brain waves. And we use colors. In fact, we use maps. We actually, if you can imagine a picture of your brain mapped out region by region. So we have what's called our prefrontal cortex, our frontal cortex, our temporal lobes. So we map all that out in like an image, and then we use colors to identify where the brainwave activity is overactive or underactive. So we use warm colors like yellow, orange, red to signify the degree of overactivation. And a common pattern that we can pick up in QEEG is what I call the brain on fire condition, because we see all this red, yellow, orange, sometimes in just a couple of regions, but oftentimes the whole brain has this elevated delta pattern. That right there is for certain indication of neuroinflammation and neurotoxicity and other things. So right there, we already start to know, all right, now we have, again, we can confirm it. This is not a direct measure of that inflammation. We can then order a laboratory test to confirm it. But again, neuroscience has proven this for a long time now. Yeah, more likely we got some neuroinflammation. So not only do we need something to start rebalancing that energy in the brain, which is where neurofeedback plays a role, but maybe let's order some tests, or let's start you on some natural supplements to quell that fire, to quell that inflammation. That make sense?
Absolutely. I
So
got
hopefully I don't lose
so
people, but yeah, looking at the
no.
electricity
I've got so
patterns.
many questions because, I want to put it into practical terms for me, for someone like me that would like when I came to you, when I found out about neurofeedback, what could it do for me? Now, I had head trauma after a car accident. I had my whole body trauma, 4 herniated discs, so all that stuff. And I noticed cognitive decline like right away, to the point where it was so noticeable. 1 hour of work that I would normally take to research to do the show would take 4 hours. So if I did 2 hours of studying to do one show that takes an hour, I was doing 4 hours to do the
Wow.
same work after the accident. So it was really noticeable. And I went through a lot of different testing. They checked my brain and they did all this other stuff. But can you really tell inflammation in a MRI? Can you tell inflammation in a CT? I don't know. But all I know is that I could not remember things anymore.
Yeah.
And little by little, I have felt like I'm returning to where I used to be because I did neurofeedback. And I thank you for that. I thank you for the opportunity for me to experience it, and why I'm so passionate that this is something that everybody should do. Now, if somebody would have come to me in the past and said, you should do neurofeedback, I would probably say, nah, I don't know. I don't know how good this is going to be. And I may not have the budget for it because we
Oh,
know insurance doesn't pay for it. And I think that that would be probably the number one reason. I want to ask all of you out there, all of you listening, friend, viewing friend, what would you say is the number one reason you wouldn't want to try neurofeedback? Because I never, he, Dr. John Silva, it's like when you think about the brain, you think of mind control, you think of, cluck like a chicken. When you go to these those shows that they're like hypnosis and they're telling you what to do, and the person is, I've never been a good subject. I would never be, I don't think anybody could ever hypnotize me. However, there's always that fear that they're taking
mhm.
your mind and mind control. So that would have been my number one fear. My second fear is doing something like that would take a lot of time. And I don't have the time to go anywhere and sit at a clinic, do this, come back and do the driving, go back and forth. When I learned about neurofeedback and the neurofeedback that you were doing, that I could do it in the privacy of my own home, that I can go to your clinic once to measure, to do that QEEG,
Yeah.
and also do other testing. Okay. And then when I find out that it's cheaper than going to a doctor's office. Probably if you look at, you know, like I have I used to work with um, a psychiatrist that was a functional psychiatrist that helped people get off their medication. It was $350 an hour to go to her.
Wow.
Yeah, that's $350 an hour to go to her. And if you can afford that, that's great, do it. But when I learned about the time limitations, that I overcame that time limitation belief and the financial limitations belief. So let's talk about what kind of involvement, because I went from, I think I did neurofeedback for about a year. And
Yeah.
within a
I
short
mean,
period of time, we did three QEEGs. The first one,
yeah,
the second one, and the last one that we did. And we showed a side by side of my brain and the
yeah,
improvement. And I am so passionate about this that I really do want to overcome the financial burden that this would have. Do you mind if I ask? I mean, what is the
of course.
average? What should people expect?
Yeah,
I know this isn't paid by insurance, but I really dislike anybody telling me, especially my insurance. That's why I do health share. I don't do insurance. My health share, I can go anywhere I want. Now, when it comes to the payment, you know, I've heard people going, well, I'm not going to go this because my insurance won't pay for it. Well, the end result might be cheaper if you pay out of pocket. So let's talk about, how does that work? How does this financially, let's overcome this financial burden.
sure. Yeah. So first off, and when it comes to insurance, and I get it, I've been in the field for 24 years, where most of the services I've ever provided, including neurofeedback, are not traditionally covered by your traditional insurance
Correct.
plans,
Yeah.
including the federally funded programs, Medicare, Medicaid. In fact, they're the worst. They cover very little of any of this stuff within the scope of functional medicine or functional neurology. So you have to just come to that conclusion that this is our faulty system. I think it's going to change. It's going to take some time to change. I think we will start to see reimbursement for this stuff, but I wouldn't hold your breath. Okay, so you have to just come to that realization and just really dive deep and say, how much do you value your health? And in this case, how much specifically do you value your brain health? Remember, your brain is everything. Okay, if you want to put things in perspective, look around you. Look at how many people at younger ages now are developing forgetfulness, memory issues, being diagnosed with dementia, or maybe not being diagnosed, but yet they still have the problem.
And the
And
behavioral
conventional
issues,
medicine really
Dr.
has
John,
nothing to offer.
and I don't want to, I don't mean to interrupt, but I'm seeing 10-year-olds, 9-year-olds, 7-year-olds
Mm-hmm.
that do not know how to regulate their emotions
Oh, big time. Yeah.
because they're
Big part of my
playing all these
practice is
games.
kids with, yeah. And again, there's so
ADD.
many factors that run into that. But at the end of the day, you just have to have a heart to heart talk with yourself and say, all right, insurance will pay for my surgeries, for all these other things, medications for the rest of my life, but it won't pay for something like this, even though it's non-invasive, there's really no adverse effects, and it's getting as far to the root cause as we can. How much value do I have for my own personal health and well-being and my brain health and well-being? Once you can come to that conclusion, say, all right, this is worthwhile for me. All right, let's look at the cost, because the cost is reality. If you don't have the resources, you simply don't have the resources. But when I actually present this to people, they're actually quite pleasantly surprised. And the reason being is, as you just mentioned, going to a psychologist, and I've heard this from plenty of people, a typical visit in the scope of, call it psychiatry, psychology, at minimum $125 to $150, upwards of, as you mentioned, 300 plus. That's just a single visit to that office. And to also further put this in perspective, because you did mention home base. So up until about 6, 7 years ago, in my neurofeedback practice, people would come to me because we did not have the technology at that time to deliver these services from home. And in my clinic, we charged anywhere between $80 to $125 per neurofeedback session. And people usually did this 3 times a week over the course of several weeks. And depending on the severity of their brain dysregulation, dysfunction, sometimes months. It did add up. We do offer a variety of different monthly pay plan options that can chunk that down to smaller bits that can meet their budget. But the reality is, and I'll just give an example. So home-based neurofeedback not only provides us the convenience of doing this from home, the comfort of doing it from home, the same great results. In fact, I'm finding even better results because people are able to do this more frequently and accomplish the job that much quicker. Not that it should ever be a race, but we do have that ability now, and it's become more cost effective. So instead of $130, for instance, for a single neurofeedback session on a monthly pay plan option, we can take that 130 and you have a whole month worth of neurofeedback. And you retain, I'm working with a new system now, you actually retain the neurofeedback equipment. And this is the fascinating, this is what charges me. Again, I love helping people with overcoming the depression, their anxiety, their panic, helping kids get better grades in school, come off their ADHD medications. That is wonderful. I love it. It's why I keep doing what I do. But when you look at the other side of that, let's go beyond your challenges, your diagnosis. Let's get that resolved or as improved as much as we can. Now there's a whole application for neurofeedback for what we call peak performance, to continue to optimize your brain's potential to better your life in so many different ways. And this is this reason why I continue to do neurofeedback and have been doing it since I discovered it 12 years ago. I don't do it as frequently as I used to, but I will sit down usually once every 2 weeks and do a 40-minute session. I use a specific type of neurofeedback that elicits like a meditative response in my brain. It feels wonderful when I'm done. It feels like I've been sleeping for hours, but yet I wasn't asleep. I was like in a semi-sleep state, and I come out, I'm clear-headed. I can take on what I consider the most meaningless tasks on my list and say, all right, I'm motivated to do those now and do it with ease. So it's really fascinating, this whole realm of neurofeedback. In fact, I work with a lot of athletes and professionals who are not coming in and discovering neurofeedback because of a specific issue. They're doing it because they want that competitive edge. They want that faster reaction time when they're, for instance, a quarterback having to make a split decision on where to throw the ball, just to what trajectory, and how to do that effortlessly. That's where all that is processed from our brain. In fact, I encourage your listening audience, go, if you have a Netflix, even just look at the trailer, go to YouTube, check out the quarterback series from 2 years ago with Kirk Cousins, who at that time was the Minnesota Vikings quarterback. And I think it was episode 4, but it shows he and his wife doing neurofeedback together, and they had been doing it for years. Not necessarily, and I don't know his personal life or his wife's personal life, but just seeing that interview, I don't think either one of them suffered depression or panic attacks, but they were doing it because they realized the importance of their brain, and especially for him as a professional athlete making millions of dollars, he needed to be as sharp as he could. He needed to have decision-making skills like that none of us really have to practice on a daily basis. They've been doing it for years. Tom Brady, another one, he's been doing neurofeedback for decades. So the point being is, this is where it gets really fascinating, because there's no limit to really what we have in between our ears. And I always mention, and in our previous podcast, that's why I love the work of Dr. Joe Dispenza. I'll throw that name out there. So look him up. He's teaching people in group fashions. He has these conferences that are a week long, and he teaches people how to go into these meditative states. At the end of the day, what these meditative states are doing is reorganizing the brain wave activity to spark that healing capabilities of our body, which we all inherently have, but we lose because of things like inflammation, neuroinflammation. So point being is, it's a fascinating field, and neurofeedback is the most direct way I know to influence our brain's function for the better. There's other things that we can do, and sometimes we will have to use what I call a multi-therapeutic approach, a systematic or a synergistic effect of maybe combining neurofeedback with brainwave entrainment, or perhaps some photobiomodulation, which is the use of red light therapy to increase circulation, to heal some of the nerve damage. And again, all of these things have been positioned into a place where we can do most of this from home, which is really fascinating.
And I
Yeah.
love it. And I love it. And I am so grateful. And every time you come on, I'm excited that more and more people are learning about this, because we don't know what we don't know. And we might think that this is about aging. We might think that this is, and especially with me, that my mom has advanced dementia. I remember my mom would tell me, you know, Lily, we knew that she had dementia. She had been diagnosed in her mid 70s. And she would say, sometimes she'd say, you know, when it was getting really bad, sometimes I think I'm losing my mind. She'd say, you know, Lily, I think I'm losing my mind. And I say, don't worry about it, mommy. You know, don't worry about it, you know, because sometimes I don't remember things, you
Yeah.
know? And so I would just kind of like calm her down. I wish I knew then what I know now. I wish I did. And you know, I don't have a lot of regrets and I don't ever want to go back and change anything because I believe that everything has purpose and everything has
Yeah.
meaning. And but if I could, I wish I could have done, you know, neurofeedback on my mom to
Yeah.
see. And sometimes still I wish I could do, but would she still sit still and would she do, you know, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know because she is so far gone. But I had the most fun with her this last time that I was with her and she was just sharp and calling me Lily. And I'm thinking, oh gosh, maybe I can do something with her. So we'll talk about that. But
Sure.
I just think that there's just so much we don't know. And I want to encourage all of you to go to whenyouneedafriend.com, to go to my Facebook page, to check out all the different, learn about the brain, because you know, we need our bodies to function. And I've often said that, you know, a healthy person has 1,000 dreams, but a sick person or someone that is facing, you know, some form of illness only has one, and that's to be well. But when you see that it's the mind that's going, I know a lot of people, if you had a choice with your mind going or your vision going or your hearing going, I'm sure that you would choose anything but the brain to go first
Hmm.
or to leave. So I want to encourage you to really seriously think about this. Doctor, and I'm gonna just say that by listening to today's class, and go to when you, I'll tell you what about listening about today's class, what you're going to get for listening for today's class. But go to whenyouneedafriend.com. Please subscribe, share this video with your friends. We all know somebody who knows somebody that is either dealing with depression, anxiety, dealing with a child with ADD, a child with behavior modification issues, you know, adults dealing with adult, you know,
Yeah.
dealing with ADD as well. Could this be the answer for them? So just check out, be curious about this, and there's going to be some gifts and prizes after I'm done here. So share this video, make sure you like and follow me on social media. Also, when you go to whenyouneedafriend.com, please subscribe. It's a two-step process. You subscribe, then you opt in. So make sure you opt in. That way you know who's the teacher in the classroom, especially now that we're doing free coaching sessions on the air. And you can ask your questions. You can email me at lily@whenyouneedafriend.com or text me to that you emailed me. Don't text me the whole thing, but text me that you emailed me because you want to participate in our Thriving Thursdays coaching calls. And so I want to make sure that I don't miss anything that you send me. So make sure that you text me at 407-373-5959. While you are at whenyouneedafriend.com, there's lots of resources. One of them that I want to encourage you to look at is Dr. John Silva's information. We have it on BitChute, we have it on Facebook and Instagram. It's going to be a lot easier to find it on YouTube. But once you find it on YouTube, you're welcome to watch it on and on BitChute because there's there as well. You have the name and everything. But I just want to encourage you that you are part of the solution, that you be the solution. And so I want to encourage you to go there. I also want to encourage you to know that you could become an enrolled student in the classroom and help the classroom grow, whether it's your time, your talent, your treasure. Help us, you know, whether it's $5, a dollar, $1,000 a month, a one-time donation, help us continue to grow. Today we have Dr. John Silva, and you can find Dr. Silva at drjohnsilva.com. That's his website. Now, here's the gifts. This is the gifts that you get. When you mention my name, or if you email me at lily@whenyouneedafriend.com, and you want to have a 45-minute free, free 45-minute consultation with Dr. John Silva. Very generous of him for my listeners, followers of the classroom, whether you're listening on podcasts or you're watching on social media or BitChute or YouTube. You too can ask. So go to lily@whenyouneedafriend.com and type or email me at lily@whenyouneedafriend.com that you would like that. We also have Rewiring the Brain 2.0 that you can get for free. So ask for that. You can text me for that, and then I can send you the passcode to get in. But these are ways that you can start taking your health, your brain, your life back. And so thank you, Dr. Silva, for everything that you do
Of
to
course.
help somebody, especially you help them finance. If they decide that this is something that they can do, you're saying that it could be as low as $130 a month, correct?
Correct. Yeah. Yeah.
Unlimited.
And you know, I'm always the adage, something is better than nothing. So even if
Correct.
that does not fit someone's budget, you know, it may not be neurofeedback to start with, but there's plenty of other tools I have in my toolbox, so to speak,
Mm-hmm.
that we can start to getting your brain as healing. So let's look at some nutrient supplements. Let's look at things like brainwave entrainment. So even lower cost if you were to break it down on a monthly pay plan. There's something there for anybody, no matter where you think your limited resources might be. But yeah, so the point being is something is better than nothing. It saddens me when I see people completely walk away from doing nothing at all when there are so many opportunities. And I try to bring all this together for my clients. And like I mentioned, it's sometimes a multi-therapeutic approach. Neurofeedback is the core of what I do. But again, if there's inflammation at play, yeah, we can only do so much neurofeedback. But if we're not addressing that inflammation or those toxins that cause the inflammation to begin with, then we're still going to have good outcomes, but we could have even better outcomes, shorter period of time, more long lasting when we address all of that. And that's all part of my services to my clients. So it's not just the delivery of the neurofeedback services and walking them through that and
That's
monitoring
right.
those. It's everything else that comes with that.
And I've
So,
discovered no one size does not fit all. So what worked for
mhm,
me may not work for somebody else. They might need that plus something else. So I love that you're a one-stop shop for the brain.
yeah.
You can help them with that. Because we're like this has gone so fast. I feel like I hadn't seen you in a long time, and it's so nice to kind of catch up with one another. But is there any like last minute, words of wisdom that you can impart with somebody to make this an urgent choice?
Yeah. Consider your brain in anything that you're dealing with in your health. Okay. So I don't care if it's you're having a knee problem or you're having a GI problem, you have an autoimmune condition, or you suspect any of those things. Always consider your brain as part of the recovery and the solution. But especially if you're having with issues directly from the brain, things like emotional challenges, behavioral challenges, or cognitive challenges, always come back to the brain. Okay. And realize that there are a lot of solutions that have existed for decades, non-invasive, non-surgical, non-pharmaceutical. And again, when we combine them, can really give you the best outcomes in such a short period of time. And how I know that is I work with clients that have done the conventional approaches practically their whole life. And literally within a matter of just a couple of months, the turnarounds that these people have, and even full resolution after a couple of months. Now, this is, as you mentioned, it comes down to always time and money. This is not a quick fix. This is not like taking a medication, your symptoms are go away or suppressed significantly until your next dose. And especially when it comes to cognitive related issues, there's no magic pill for that. There's no magic pill for any of these things. But the fact that you can improve your brain health that significantly to overcome the basic cognitive issues or the deep depression or anxiety and panic in just a matter of weeks or months is amazing. And that's the power of neurofeedback. And the reason why is because, again, the most direct way that I know to influence our brain's function. And it's so easy to do. We never even touched on that. You literally have a tablet or a computer that you're watching a YouTube video on. You could be listening, you could be watching one of our podcasts or watching a movie.
Yes. Yes. Encouraged.
Literally. And what you're doing is your brain is receiving feedback through a screen that dims and goes in and out, volume fluctuates. And what that is doing, engaging your brain to rebalance its electricity, so to speak. And then when we add to that maybe some supplements to support anti-inflammatory or anti-inflammation support, maybe we start looking at your dietary habits when we meet for our regular coach calls. Because I'm a coach too. So, hey, let's look at your dietary habits. Oh yeah, let's take a look at that food item. Yeah, there's some toxins right there. Those food additives, those food colorings that your child is consuming in their favorite treat. That's probably driving some of that high delta, which is an indication of neuroinflammation. Let's just maybe find a healthy alternative. I always like to do that first, rather than just an elimination. Let's go to Whole Foods or Trader Joe's and find that same type of food, but in a different package from a different manufacturer that doesn't use those harmful toxins. It really can be as simple as that.
Yeah.
And the parents are amazed. They're like, wow, I didn't know this stuff existed.
Yeah.
Even your common grocery store, like down here in Florida, we have Publix. They have whole aisles dedicated to just those natural, so-called organic, clean foods. Start shopping more in those aisles. And it's amazing what you can do to overcome that inflammation.
Well, I tell you, this is a conversation that we need to continue having. I want to encourage you to take advantage to getting to know and having a free consultation with Dr. John Silva, which is such a generous offer. 45-minute consultation. Usually it's like 15 minutes or 5 minutes when you meet a doctor, and you're out of pocket. Copay is probably $50, $60, and you get 5 minutes with your doctor. This is so generous of you, Dr. Silva. And I want to encourage all of you that if you are just curious about it, just book an appointment with Dr. Silva. That's it. And I noticed a difference within me. I didn't feel like I had these huge problems because I learned to live with it. I learned to work around it, but it was taking a lot of my time. And I noticed it for the first time that it was how I was feeling after the first summit that I did. And it was like so calm. And it was like, it was unbelievable. It was a different feeling. So if rewiring the brain, if neurofeedback can do that, what could it do to you? What can it do for you in your life? So Dr. Silva, thank you so much for everything that you do.
You're welcome.
I am so excited. It's a new year. Let's make a commitment to kind of like rewire our brain and continue to grow and share the story of how you prevented something from getting much worse. So thank you so much, Dr. Silva.
Of course. And coming back to that consultation, again, it's just a conversation. It's going to be a virtual consultation. Unless you live locally to my practice. But that truly is all it's going to be. Just a two-way communication. Let's discover what's going on. Let's go a little bit deeper into your history. From there, I'll start to put together a roadmap for you at no cost on what next best steps we can look at.
Perfect.
And then as we look at those next best steps, I'll start to share with you what those costs would be. So
perfect.
There's absolutely no reason why you shouldn't do this for yourself or your family.
Great final words. And please remember, we'll be right here waiting for you worldwide at whenyouneedafriend.com. This is Lily McDermott and Dr. John Silva wishing you love, peace, joy, and unexpected abundance. Make it the best day ever.
The opinions and advice expressed on the Lillian McDermott radio show are intended for the individual callers and guests on the program and are presented to our wider audience solely for general educational purposes. Please act responsibly and consult personally with your own medical, psychological, or nutritional expert before taking any steps to improve your life.